right, so let's see how this works out.
Let's
Today
hope.
we have. Go ahead, Dennis.
No, I'm just saying. Without the. Hey, Hank, how you doing? By the way, I was glad to hear it.
Yeah,
Yeah, we have no Craig this week, so Travis is at master control, and hopefully we won't crash and burn like we used to all the
every episode.
time.
Hank, how you doing? Today we have back with us, we have Eric Vogel, the designer of recently "Don't Turn Your Back" tabletop game. He designed, if you remember from our little plug a couple weeks ago, he designed Zeppelin Attack. He designed.
Don't see
Don't
rubber
fail my
pet.
brain. My brain is failing me. Zeppelin Attack, Don't Turn Your Back, something about Romans, a children's game for cognitive therapy. But anyway, Eric will list it for us. Eric, welcome to the show, or welcome back to the show. How you been?
Good, thanks. How are you doing?
Oh, tired.
Yeah.
So, remind me again of the games that you've designed.
Sure. So, the first thing I ever designed was that children's psychotherapy game to teach kids cognitive therapy skills. That's called Land of Simon. That was published back in 2004. Then Cambria and Hibernia both got their professional release in 2011. I'd also self-published a game called Ormorka in 2010. Then, let's see, Romans Go Home. I self-published it in 2012. No, I'm sorry. I self-published it in 2013, and it got re-released in a much nicer edition by Editions Louis Mem in 2014. And then also Zeppelin Attack got released in 2014, and now the Kickstarter for Don't Turn Your Back is done, and it should be out around September of this year.
That game, I was lucky enough to get a prototype to, I guess, kind of beta test, and that game is awesome. Just, I'll go out the gate saying that. I had a little trouble getting started, because that's not the normal type of game that I like to play. But once I got the mechanics down, and my wife isn't really familiar with any kind of tabletop gaming aside from like board games. So once I got the basic mechanics down, it became easier and easier, and I realized that it's kind of a play in advance type game. You need to be a couple steps ahead and be planning what you're going to do 2 or 3 rounds from now instead of in the moment. But the artwork, the story, you only get a slice of the story for Don't Turn Your Back. You need to go into the expanded universe of Don't Rest Your Head, and what was the book called?
Oh, the book of short stories was called Don't Read This Book. And then there was also a supplement for Don't Rest Your Head called Don't Lose Your Mind. And Don't Rest Your Head, the role-playing game, is by Fred Hicks.
Yeah, and I want to get into the larger story, so I'm probably gonna buy the books and the short stories, because it's an interesting concept. It reminds me of Dark City a little bit, but once I got the mechanics down, that game was an absolute blast to play.
Good. I'm glad you really enjoyed it. You know, I think that Dark City was one of the influences Fred cited on Don't Rest Your Head. So I think you're right on there.
And what do you have planned now that the Kickstarter was successfully funded, which we are counting as win number 2 for the podcast? But now that it's successfully funded and that game is now going to be published, and everything is good to go there. What do you have on the docket for us next?
At some point, don't you rest your head? Excuse me. Evil Hat Productions is going to be doing a card game of mine called Kaijuko that was co-written by my friend Chris Ruggiero, and that's set in a kind of a Pacific Rim-like setting where giant monsters are coming and stomping on the earth, and corporations are trying to sort of rebuild the earth as fast as the monsters can crush it and make consumer products out of giant monster parts. So kaiju skin handbags and Kaiju Mojo male enhancement creams, those kinds of things. It's a much more comic sort of game. I'm not really sure where that sits in Evil Hat's production timeline right now, because I think there's a different tabletop project they're doing first that isn't one of mine. But that's in the offing at some point. And then there's a different project I have for them that's in the design stage right now. I have a few other designs. You have to wait and see if publishers want them. I'm going to an event this at the end of the month, in which I hope to get to interact with some publishers and maybe find a home for some of my other games.
And what are your other games aside from the Evil Hat stuff? What are the other games that you're working on? If you can share that, what types of games are they going to be?
Sure. There are a couple of other board game designs I have. Evil Hat is mostly interested in doing things that are primarily card-based. So I have some designs that aren't a good fit for them. I can talk about what they're about, except that whenever a game acquires a publisher, most of the time, what it's about completely changes. The publisher just says, no, we don't want this to be about Romans, let's make it about zombies, something like that. That happens a lot of the time when you get published, not always. So I have two games that are a little more in the mold of Cambria or Hibernia that are sort of tiny empire building games that both play in about an hour and they're empire building games, but they're very light for empire building games by the standards of empire building games. Those are the things I'm working on at the moment. I'm always trying to design more games. I've been on my break from school for the past month, so I've been trying to work on some designs in that time. I don't really want to talk about any of those because 50-50, they'll never see the light of day. I design probably 4 or 5 complete games for every one that I actually feel like trying on anyone else. It's one way or another, they don't. Either something about them doesn't quite work, or I feel like, oh, I've done that before, or there's just nothing original about that one. Meh. Throw it out. So I was working on one right before we started talking today, but and it's about essentially being a space pirate and building up your spaceship. Will it ever see the light of day? Who knows? It might suck. It might go away completely. We'll just have to see.
And that actually, you mentioning you're on break from school leads me to one of the most fascinating things. The reason, one of the main reasons, aside from just wanting to get you back on the show, you are a professor of psychology and psychologist in your day job, and you design board games and RPGs, and that is something you don't really ever hear about. Most game designers are the super nerd or the stereotypical nerd, IT guy, but you are a psychologist. How did that all meld together? Because that's what fascinates me the most.
And to be fair, I never really designed RPGs, by the way. I really just designed board games. But I designed one just as a joke that I think we talked about last time. But I'm not really an RPG player or designer. let's see. I'm probably someone who could have been an IT nerd if I'd went left instead of right at some point. My junction, in my past, that could have easily enough happened. Some days I think I might be, happier in a cubicle just writing code or something. I think the main reason I didn't go that route because I was interested in computers as a kid was that I'm just not a great math whiz. And I think that kind of put me off the idea of trying to do computer programming for a living. Maybe it shouldn't have. Maybe there's not as much math really needed as I thought. And I'm not as bad at math as I thought I was at that age, but that put it off. And in general, I think I wanted to I've always wanted to move into something that would be social because I think just as a person, I have some isolative tendencies. And so if I did something for work or for my hobby that was really totally isolative, I might just go down that road to a really unhealthy extent. So it's better if I do things that force me to interact with other people. And I think it also forced me to kind of cultivate my interpersonal skills, my social skills, and I think all of that was sort of healthy for my development. And of course, board games are like that. They force you to interact with other people, unlike electronic games, which I also enjoy. Even if you're interacting with other people in an electronic game, you're not really interacting with them. There's theoretically another person on the other end of the machine, but it could be an AI. You don't know. It could just be an AI and a chat bot.
For all you know, there's nothing on the other end. It's just a disembodied voice.
Yeah, it could be. The original kind of everybody's living the Turing test every day now, I guess, when they play on their Xbox. But in fact, I don't think. I think human beings have to interact directly in vivo to kind of really get the needs that people get met through interpersonal interaction. So I have both a hobby that forces me to do that and a job that forces me to do that. So I think that's better for my health. Did that really answer your question, or did I go off on a total tangent?
No, that actually that makes a lot of sense, especially to me. I'm very misanthropic and reclusive.
I
and it wasn't.
I would say especially the three of us on the show, we're more social introverts. We can be in public, but it's only for short periods of time before we start going, I really can't stand being around people all that much. It just starts to become this, ugh. And trust me, I'm in a job now where I spend hours a day with people, and it really does tax me every once in a while.
Well, I
experienced that.
Go ahead, Eric.
I was going to say I experienced that too. I have, if I'm around large numbers of people in particular, I definitely feel the need to kind of pull away and recharge somewhat and have some alone time. So I identify with what you're saying.
Yeah, I had known Dennis. I worked with Dennis for what, 3.5 years before I actually talked to you.
Yeah.
And then
at each other as we walked past. What's up? That's all we did. Just one of these head things. Well, head bob, and then the way we went. I think it was over Doctor Who or something where we went, oh, you too? And then it was some nerdy thing that only made us talk. It was like,
yeah, I do think it was Doctor Who, but then it broke open, and Dennis has a longer history of tabletop gaming, whether it was RPGs or board games or card games, than I do. I grew up very somewhat isolated as a kid. I had a brother and 3 sisters, and then I was adopted, and I had a brother, and then I was awkward and angry, and so no, I didn't really have that many friends. And then it wasn't until I became more and more expressive in my artistic side and my nerdy side that I actually started making friends. But Dennis's history of gaming exceeds mine, and that the idea that you could do a day job like psychology, or like Dennis is now into massage therapy, and instead of working in a factory. But for me, and like I'm still trying my very best to get out of the factory and into the embalming room. That's where I want to end up. Is I want to be a mortician.
I actually did have somebody in one of my gaming groups who was a student mortician for a long time. Interesting person. One day she came and brought a big load of, here, anybody want to try my father's homemade jerky? My father's homemade jerky is here. We were just thought, nah, it's all right.
Just a little unnerving. Actually, Travis, for you, I think to become a little more social, start taking interpretive dance lessons. I think that'd be good for you. Oh, you just
Dude, I've got 2 left feet. That wouldn't work.
interpretive dance. It doesn't make any sense at all, anyways. I mean, it really doesn't. At least you can be social. I mean, there you go.
Well, as a mortician, you're kind of alone. Kind of.
Yeah.
Well, that's actually one of the driving things behind not only my interest in death itself and the science and the spirituality of it, or the lack of spirituality, depending on who you're talking to. Just the history of death is fascinating to me. But the real main driving point is, as a mortician, or because I want to be basically just a mortician. I don't want to be a funeral director. I don't think I have the interpersonal skills to do that. Especially, my shirt says it. I'm not good at empathy. So one of the driving things was it would just be me and a body. Like there's nobody to talk back to me. There's nobody to tell me what to do. I can perfect my craft, and that would be it. That would be the story every day. I would be able to go into work, know that I've perfected my craft, and I have no one talking back to me.
Well, like you get complaints anyways, really. I mean, I'm not gonna lie, dude. You know, if they start complaining, I think there's a way bigger problem than we need to work with.
This is true. This is very true.
There's probably a future out there somewhere for a real kind of avant-garde post-punk mortician. Like, there's going to be people dying who are just like, just do your magic. I want something. I want something special. I don't want to look like a mannequin in there.
Look, Salvador Dali. There you go. Just start dress them up like in impersonations. Just different famous people.
Make me into a butterfly. A butterfly made of guts. That's what I want.
Well, and it's fascinating because I'm kind of a conservative when it comes to graveyards, when it comes to death itself. Aside from my physical, like, outward look, I have a vest that I kind of like to wear just to upset people. That says "I hope you die" really big on the back of it. And that would be even funnier if I was a mortician, because then it would be, "I really do hope you die, so I get more business." But outwardly, I project this rebellious kind of look, but I'm very conservative inwardly. The way I think and my philosophy is very conservative. So for me, like, to do the wild, because there's that show on what channel? I think it's either Discovery or History or TLC, the Learning Channel, which anybody learning from that channel is, I fear for our future. But it's with the wild and crazy funerals, and there are morticians that are embalming people sitting on motorcycles and embalming people standing up in the corner of the room with their arms crossed. Like, that to me seems blasphemous, because of the way that I am mentally and how conservative I am mentally. So I'm conflicted even in that.
Well, that's probably best, given that's the profession you want to go into. I don't think there isn't seriously lots of business, I don't think, for a punk mortician. So you're probably better off going that route.
Well, and that's the great thing about being a punk rock mortician is nobody has to know that you're a punk rock mortician. You're just a mortician to them because you're already weird. So and morticians are still unfortunately looked at as being somewhat weird in society anyway. But that would being a mortician is almost as punk rock as you can get. Because you're an outcast in society, but it does amaze me that you can have a job like you do, well, two jobs like you do. I guess if you wanted to get technical, and be able to play games and design games that are just so far outside of what you do professionally, at least from an outsider, a player's perspective. Except for the one cognitive therapy for children, which was obviously designed with therapy in mind. But it amazes me that you can do both. Like you're not only a nerd and really good at the games that you've designed. I haven't had the pleasure of playing Zeppelin Attack yet, but it is one that I wanted to play. Dennis was one of the people that I played games with, and now I live in New Jersey, and he lives outside of Chicago, so it's kind of difficult to play card games. But
interesting though, because I can just hold it up to the camera. It's got like right here, this one.
Yeah, this one.
That one right there. No, the other one. You're cheating. I know you're cheating.
I can go get it. It's right over there.
Is it difficult at all to separate your professional life as a psychologist? And I guess I may be looking at it wrong, but is it difficult for you to separate the psychology part from the just game nerd?
No, it's not difficult. It might be more difficult if I was a practicing therapist instead of a professor full-time. As a therapist, you need to be a little bit concerned about clients sort of encountering you in some other venue or some room, or seeing you in a different light than they normally see you in. Although, for the most part, being a board game designer is a fairly harmless thing for them to discover me doing, compared to other hobbies I might have, theoretically, it might be more problematic. It's maybe a little bit of work to make time for both. I suppose designing board games in some ways uses some of the same mental energy that I might use on writing papers, say, in my profession. So to some degree, I suppose, pursuing the hobby sometimes comes at the expense of my psychology career a little bit. But I know a lot of psychologists for whom psychology is sort of both their career and their hobby. And that's really kind of how they get ahead. And to me, that's having that kind of one-sided life isn't really doing very good modeling for anybody. So I wouldn't really want to do that. I would just as soon people see that I have a life outside of psychology and outside of academia. I'm not just hell-bent on getting ahead in academia and doing some kind of the other things that psychologists do. And I think that shows a little better balance on my part. Then again, it wouldn't hurt if I had a hobby that got me more exercise than what I do, given that both my hobby are completely sedentary. I suppose that's not great modeling. But, exercise will kill you.
I lift weights, but they're heavy. I just can't do it.
All my jock friends now, they can't walk anymore. Either their knees are gone or their back is gone, or they've suffered some terrible, debilitating injury, whereas, my cholesterol is a little high, but aside from that, I'm fine. Well, that and the asthma. Oh, let's face it, I'm a wreck. I'm not that healthy. What am I saying?
I uh, I can actually appreciate that more than because I work in a factory. I do forging, and whereas I'm very interested in what I do, the forming of metal, I don't I don't like to spend a whole lot of time contemplating what I do for a living. So, like, my hobby is I make music, if you can call it that, and I read books. I read lots of books, and that's what I do as a hobby. Like, that's my one of my passions. One of the greater passions is to read books. And eventually I might write one, but I highly doubt that I'll get around to it because I'm lazy. But the last, what has it been, 3 people that we've had on the show, or has it just been the last 2? I think it's been the last 2. We've had Anthony Neil Smith last week, or 2 weeks ago, and then M.L. Brennan. Both of them authors, both of them professors at their own respective universities. And it amazes me, and I've asked this question to both of them, and I'm going to ask it to you now because it's something that interests me. Have you had a student who has played your game or developed or what's the word I'm looking for?
No, fine. No.
Discovered, not developed. Discovered your game while taking a class from you? Have you had that student that says, "Hey, I know you from somewhere," and then they discover that it's because they've played your game?
Kind of. I had one student who ran into me at a game night, and so kind of discovered me as a gamer there. I tell students I'm a game designer, but aside from my therapy game, I don't really bring and show them the games or tell them about my Kickstarters because I don't want to give the impression, you want an A in Vogel's class, better go buy his game. I'm trying not to give that idea. Interestingly, one of the alumni of our school, so one of our students who graduated, discovered, ended up playtesting Don't Turn Your Back with the publisher, and he had been, I guess, one of the playtesters of Don't Rest Your Head way back in the day. So it was a kind of a long, circuitous route to say, Dr. Vogel wrote that game? So that's come up a couple of times. And I've run into a couple of other gamers who are psychologists, although not many. As you say, it's a lot of IT professionals in that crowd, as well as a fair number of people who are underemployed. There's a lot of that in the game. Well, I mean, gaming's a great thing to do if you're underemployed. It doesn't cost any money, aside from the bus to get to the game store. As long as you play other people's games, you're fine. Those are about the only times I've really kind of had that you run into the teacher at the grocery store kind of moment as regards my my game design and my psychology life. I've also occasionally had somebody in the game world kind of discover me as a psychologist. And, that's a little more awkward if they're suddenly like, wow, let me ask your advice about this. How about this? I can. I have all kinds of problems. Help me. No. We have a different relationship. I can't do that.
Yeah, I will admit that I myself took slight advantage of knowing you as a psychologist to ask you a question about another idea that I had for a podcast, and you've been supremely helpful in everything you do, and it surprises me and at the same time makes me feel more comfortable, because every time that we talk to somebody, we've interviewed mostly authors, a director, and a few other people, but mostly authors, and and mostly genre authors, and it always kind of surprises me, but then makes me feel better that the geeky, nerdy, gamer genre, whatever have you, everybody is still really nice and open and willing to talk and willing to help, and I guess it's something that I don't expect, because I'm an asshole and I kind of base my worldview on who I am, and I know I'm an asshole, so I expect coming into like talking to people
saying that, or keep alluding to something like that you're a complete introvert, antisocial, all of these things. I'm starting to suspect that this is all greatly exaggerated in your self-characterization.
I have had the benefit of starting the podcast with Dennis and Craig to kind of allow me to blossom a bit as a personality.
Became a very social butterfly, and that's because of this. Yes.
Gabrielle noticed. Dennis.
Yeah, I know. Listen, again, before Gabrielle, you and I hung out, you were just a curmudgeonly old man at the age of like 20. I mean, it was horrible. And then you started hanging out, we started talking, we started doing stuff. All of a sudden, you'd be like, hey, it's not so bad. Your hermitage kind of ended, I guess, would be the thing.
And then I moved to New Jersey and had a family, and now it's an entirely different type of hermitude. There is.
You still talk to us.
That's not her. That's just a consolidation of your dependencies. That's all that is.
Nice term, consolidation of dependence. I like that. I'm going to use that. My wife will probably slap me if I actually said that, though. You're just a consolidation of my
You got the cow at home, you don't go to the dairy anymore. This is all understandable.
Yeah, I think both of our wives would probably kill us if we use that phraseology.
No.
What do you call it?
I'm not married. I can say whatever. It's fine. But see, here you're all. Look at me. I'm antisocial. I get red. You're married. You got a family. I'm single. Let's be all social. Maybe these things are not. These statements are not as true as we suppose.
Well, and that's something I've actually considered going back to therapy. I spent a few years in therapy. I'm adopted, and I was adopted 11, so I had plenty of experience beforehand that somebody who was in charge of me decided was worthy of a therapist's time. I didn't have a great experience in therapy as a child, but I thought about recently going back and kind of redefining how I look at how I characterize myself, because it is, like you said, it might be an exaggeration. Yes, I am slightly misanthropic, and that'll never change, but I'm not as typically antisocial as I used to be, and as I feel like I still am, because I have a wife, I have a child, I go to work every single day. I enjoy doing a podcast where I talk to complete strangers, and none of that fits into the mold that I've been taught of who I am. So I've kind of thought about going back into therapy and talking about that and getting new definitions, because either that or I'll just go buy a book on therapy and get the definitions myself.
I think that might be worth it. You know, the way I would talk about it as a cognitive therapist is everybody's got what we call early maladaptive schema. That is to say, theories about yourself that you form in early life. Based on experiences, not just the experiences, how you interpreted those experiences as a kid. And usually misanthropy is related to what we'd call a social isolation alienation schema, a feeling about fitting into groups, things like that. Anyway, if you're, and the way I would characterize it, if you've got this schema, no, you're not really going to get rid of that schema. That schema is part of who you are, but it makes a world of difference whether on a scale of 1 to 10 it's operating at a 9 or operating at a 7. If it's operating at a 7, you don't have to be the proverbial, stop clock that's right only twice a day. You can, have that side of yourself. You can have that quirk or whatever. But you can still get all your needs met around it. You can still be as social as you need to be. When it's up at a 9, then it's like, well, you have to. That's like a law you have to obey all the time. This kind of rigid rule about yourself you can't ever break or deviate from. And then that really starts to get in your way in your life, no matter what kind of belief it is, just because it's so rigid. So really, it's about, therapy is about shifting that belief in yourself, so much, you could say just a few percent makes all the difference in the world. It's not about going from being a misanthrope to being a social butterfly. That change probably isn't going to happen, and you probably wouldn't want to make that change if you could, because then you would feel like you were throwing yourself away if you did that. That's not so much what you're up for. You're just up for some flexibility. So a book I would recommend in that realm is called Reinventing Your Life by Jeffrey Young, Y-O-U-N-G, Young. You can probably find it in the used bookstore. It's been out for quite a while now. But that's a good one if you're kind of getting started with playing around with this stuff. And I would also say, there's a world of difference between doing therapy when you want to and it's your own choice, and when you're a kid and somebody makes you go. When you're a kid and somebody makes you go, sometimes it works out, but, at the bottom line, when you're a kid and somebody's making you do something, it's usually not the greatest. It's usually not the greatest experience.
Yeah, it was kind of forced upon me, especially towards my teen years. When I was starting to express my rebellion. It was, oh, you have to go see the therapist, and it became, instead of once a week, it was twice a week. And I convinced the therapist that I was seeing at the time that I had personality disorder. I had multiple personalities, because I started to notice, and it was that particular therapist, and I've come to understand that it was the therapist that I was seeing. It wasn't therapy in general. It was just the therapist that I happened to have been going to. I noticed he didn't pay attention, and so I could play games with him, and it became a pastime for me. Like, how am I going to convince him that I have this problem now? Because he didn't pay attention to me. And that was why I was being sent to therapy in the first place, is to talk to somebody and have them pay attention and have them dig and mine the problems out of me. I did pick up a book. I'm going to ask you if you're familiar with it. I did pick up a book a while ago. I haven't started reading it, called The Blank Slate by Steven Pinker. Are you familiar with that book?
I'm not familiar with the book. Pinker is an evolutionary psychologist and kind of a media hoe into the bargain. He's not one of my favorites, honestly.
All right, well, so evolutionary psychology, I've heard that term. Is it explain, and then I promise we'll get back to
Sure, that's fine.
the gaming part of your life, because that's actually why we brought you on, not to talk to you about the finer details of psychology. But
the short version of evolutionary psychology is, and I'm really, really going to oversimplify it here, but it is to argue that more of human nature is, in a sense, kind of hardwired than people like to think, and that it's the result of specific biological level adaptations during the process of evolution. And so it's kind of saying, well, all kinds of things about how we tend to behave are hardwired into us because they had survival value in our environment of origin. When Homo sapiens kind of first evolved and were living with a very low technological level. And they think that all kinds of things evolved in a what we would call a modular way. That your mind, your brain, in a sense, has a particular kind of module for doing a particular kind of task that early humans did, and anything that you use that module for now, it just happens to also be good at. So at some point we evolved a module that happened to be good at driving a car, or at least adequate at driving a car. I guess we wouldn't say human beings are always good at driving cars, but we can drive cars because this module that we used for hunter-gathering at some point is also capable of driving a car. We can't have evolved a car driving module because there isn't enough time between since we have created car technology for there to have been an actual, evolutionary change in that period of time. And it's a theory that doesn't in some ways make heaps of sense to me. I mean, I certainly believe in the theory of evolution. It just seems pretty clear that human beings are capable of forms of psychological adaptation and not in a much more generalized kind of way, and not simply kind of reusing, one blade of the Swiss Army knife that was created for something else for new tasks all the time. The idea of what they call massive modularity doesn't totally make sense to me. It seems to me there must be some kind of generalized cognitive ability as part of the human hardware, kind of an all-purpose cognitive ability. It's also kind of one of those theories that makes a lot of common sense arguments that seem like a bit of a stretch to me. So they're always saying, oh, well, essentially kind of men are from Mars, women are from Venus kind of stuff. Here's why that would have been adaptive in, caveman times, essentially. And I kind of think, you don't know what was adaptive in caveman times. That's really a huge stretch for you. There's no cavemen for you to observe. So anyway, that's in short version why I'm not super enthusiastic about evolutionary psychology.
That actually, it both makes me want to read the book now even more and makes me wary of the book, because I personally don't believe that I believe, just from my own brain and from my own experience, I know there's a reactionary part, and then there's the cognitive part. There's the part that actually sits there and thinks critically, and then there's the part, the lizard brain, that reacts to things. And it's usually the reaction of violence that my brain works on the best. And to say that I have the same modules and the same thought process as a Neanderthal, 2, 3, 4,000 years ago, and it just never evolved beyond that. And I just happened to be good at other things. Like, I spent the last 2 hours laying down a floor in my living room. I don't think the cavemen ever put down wood flooring in their caves. So what part of that was it the tool making, or the ability to carve a wheel that just happens to also be good at laying down engineered hardwood flooring? That doesn't appeal to me, that thought process, that takes away the ingenuity, it takes away the personality of it. So I'm actually both interested and kind of wary of the book now. Thank you for that.
And like I said, to be fair, I oversimplified what evolutionary psychology in general is saying, not necessarily what Tinker is saying in any one book. And he talks about some things that maybe you wouldn't classify as evolutionary psychology, but he does, seems to me, kind of make a living by just trying to go on TV and say interesting things. That seems to be his gig. Which, it's a kind of, to me, is kind of a pop psychological science. It does seem to me that at some point human beings must have evolved a generalized capacity to generate new adaptations, and that, in a sense, developing that capacity has diminished the need for us to make biological level evolutionary adaptations to things, because we can essentially now adapt to things cognitively. We don't have to adapt to them physically. in quite the same way, and that it enables us to adapt much, much faster than the speed of evolution in human beings, who only have, a generation every 25 years or so. The rate of biological change for us is pretty slow. And it's not something where any amount of evolution has taken place in the entire amount of what we call human history. So, and yet we've changed a lot. Therefore, that must be something else. That just seems logical to me. I'm going to get trolled about this.
Well, we'd actually...
I'm going into psychology. I'm going to get myself trolled twice as hard as I would if I just talked about board games.
No, not really. I mean, it's not gonna. We don't have enough people to troll you. Trust me.
That's good. That's good to hear. Well, I'll hear from your troll. That's what'll happen.
Do we have a troll? I think we are the trolls. Is the problem? It's our job to go out and mess with people. It's not. We don't have other people to troll us.
This episode will earn you a troll. You will get your troll merit badge for this. There is, by the way, I couldn't cite you the study, but I have encountered some findings recently that suggest that personality disorders may be very well represented among the troll community. That may be explaining a lot of that. Essentially, there are a bunch of people out there just waiting for something like the internet to come along where they could essentially, shoot at people from behind a brick wall. That's really kind of the essence of trolling.
Yeah.
Well, I've always, even from the very beginning, when I first got on the internet, what was it, 15, 16 years ago, it was message boards, and I was a bit of a troll on the AOL message boards. I'll be the first to admit. I wanted to see just how far I could take things before that chat room would kick me out. But it is, you mentioned maladjusted, the word maladjusted, and the internet is the mecca of the maladjusted. And it's kind of sad to see, because a lot of the people that I follow, especially on social media, are authors and creative types. A lot of the talk is about trolls and troll reviewers and people who just want to attack because you have some modicum of success that they don't have and they will never have. So it's kind of sad to see that the internet has become just a haven and a mecca for the maladjusted people of the world that can't, like, even me, as misanthropic as I claim to be, I love fun. Even if that fun is all by myself, I love to have fun. I love, for me, a good horror movie.
Whatever you do by yourself and behind closed doors is out your own business.
Well,
Wait,
I would say, I don't know that trolls necessarily are people who don't have fun. I think they're people with what I would call a strong punitiveness schema. They like the idea of, they get some jollies out of being harsh to people. That's really what it comes down to. And the truth is there's other folks who maybe aren't necessarily that naturally punitive, but because the internet breaks that kind of interpersonal feedback loop that you have when you're speaking to somebody directly, that it kind of they, in a sense, when they're mouthing off or they're being mean to somebody, it's more or less like they were shooting a character in a video game to them. They're not really, they don't feel like they're actually attacking another human being or doing something to somebody else who feels bad. So not everybody who trolls, I think, is necessarily, or everybody who gets critical is necessarily a troll. But then again, I'd say, they wouldn't do that in real life. At game conventions, there are people who will wait in line to tell you they don't like your game. There are guys who will wait in line to tell you what they don't like about your game that they like. Like, they like your game, but they don't want to tell you about what they like about it. They want to wait in line to tell you what they didn't like about it, because somehow, I don't know, I think it's just a kind of showing off or something. But it seems to be a very strong impulse among a certain segment of the gamer society.
I wonder if that's just Western culture. I mean, hear about Eastern or even Eastern European cultures. You don't hear people just walk up to you going, yeah, the Germans. I'll just give it to the Germans. They're always unhappy people. But just that blood in it. Well, you didn't do it right. It wasn't exactly at 45 degrees, and it wasn't put out on a Tuesday. So anyway, that's just my opinion. I don't know.
It is. I think it might be a side effect, especially in the gamer community, especially even more so in the tabletop gamer community, because we are like tabletop gamers. I love my Xbox, but I haven't played a video game in over a year. I haven't played one seriously in over a year. Dennis has become addicted to Destiny for whatever god-awful reason.
Don't
But,
ask. It's just the way it is. It's just what I do. I'm just trying to get all the exotics. That's all I'm doing. I think last week you said, I'm bound and determined because I spent so much damn money on this game. I'm going to have fun with it if it kills me. I'm gonna do it by gum.
Don't feel bad. I've been playing Treebeard. It's for kids. I still like it.
I think that it might be a side effect for especially tabletop gamers, whether it be board games or RPGs that are your passion, or card games that are your passion. We're highly marginalized, even more so than because now it's really hip and it's really cool to be a video gamer, and you can actually make money being a video gamer. So for the people who have always played the old school, who have always been gamers even before video games existed, we've always been kind of on the margins of that, especially even in the nerd culture. So to be overly critical, I think might just be a side effect of always being marginalized, even in your own communities. Like, well, you're not really a gamer.
I was gonna say that's how I kind of feel. I feel sometimes with gamers and gaming in general, RPGs, doesn't matter what. You go into a game store or what have you, it's an elitist group of nerds. They have these. Well, no, you're not a nerd, dude. You don't nerd. Have you seen this game? Do you know what this game is like? It's games like this one, but it has a different. I'm like, okay, look, dude. I heard this is a good game. I just want to pick it up. I really don't. I don't need a dichotomy, and I really don't care what your opinion is. I just really want the game. That's what I'm here for. Stop it.
I find that's true. Well, first of all, among board gamers, I find that to be more true of gamers maybe my own age or a little older, that I think became gamers in an age when gaming was more marginalized than it is now. I think it's become, nerd culture in general has become much more kind of widely socially acceptable and in vogue and all of that. And so I find that some of the younger gamers I play with don't do that as much. Often they have a better set of social skills and other things. Not always, but a larger portion of that's true. I also find that kind of troll-like tendency is a lot more common among board gamers than it is among role-playing gamers. I don't play role-playing games myself. It may be the difference between being attracted to more competitive games and more cooperative games. Maybe if you're naturally pretty competitive, which I am, I don't like non-competitive games nearly as much. I feel like, what am I doing? This isn't a game. This is an activity. I'm just gluing macaroni to a piece of cardboard or something. But the folks who more gravitate towards a cooperative activity seem to be kind of more positive in general in the kind of their interactions in that community, and so the role-playing game designers seem to me to get a lot of love, and they get a warmer kind of response from that segment, whereas the board game fans are kind of more want to let you know, no, I like your game, but don't think we're not equals. I'm critical of your game too. I'm applying critical judgment to your game. I like your game northwest, but don't think that I have suspended my critical judgment of your game. So it may be there is a little bit of kind of wounded ego there that kind of drives the need to do that and not just be like, hey man, I like your game, that's great. That said, I mean, plenty of people do come up to me and say, oh, I'm a big fan of your game, I really like that. And it's always really enjoyable when that happens. It's just my own negativity that makes me focus on the one guy who comes up and says, why is your game not more like Mage Knight? Mage Knight is much better than anything you've designed. Actually, that is literally true. I was at Origins, and this guy came up to me and just started talking to me for about 20 minutes about how great Mage Knight was and how he didn't even really want to try the game I was there to demo. He just wanted to talk to me about Mage Knight. And it's like, what? Why me? I mean, I understand that, yeah. I guess it's just like somebody coming up to you and saying, heard about Jesus? I want to tell you about Jesus. I'll tell you about Mage Knight. More or less the same impulse.
Yeah, that's I have to admit, I've never actually gone up to a creator or an artist and said, well, this is so much better than what you do. Why don't you do something more like this? I'm not
saying that you suck. I'm just saying.
It does take a certain amount of honesty to do that. You have to give them some credit for that.
Yeah, and that's, there is, you have to wonder about, how courageous they actually feel, or if they even think about that. Because I know for a fact I could not design a game as nearly as smooth, as nearly as immersive, and interesting, even as being the only game of yours that I've played to date, Don't Turn Your Back, I could not do that. I could write a story that might maybe compare, but it would be very short, and it would be kind of a one and done, that's it. I could maybe do some art that might mix up, and I realize a lot of this, it's a cooperative endeavor when you're designing board games, but I could maybe do some art that might fit, but I could never sit down and make it all work. So for me to come up and say anything negative about the game, and to even be able to comprehend that is beyond me.
All I see, Travis, is you sitting behind a counter and some guy coming up telling you how much your game sucks and Mage Knight's better, and you just diving across the table and just throttling the guy. What did you say? That's all I see.
Yeah.
And I'd just be laughing. I wouldn't even stop it. I'd just be like, I'm watching this. This is great.
It would probably be a Superman punch across the counter. Like, what? I'm not even gonna hear this. I'm not even gonna hear this negativity. I'm just gonna punch you in the face.
Well, yeah. If I were going to punch people in the face, I'd have to work out first, and that's just a bad deal all the way around. But also, I mean, I'm there. I'm at some company's booth. I'm kind of on their dime, so I can't sort of indulge myself, even if I probably wouldn't anyway. In terms of like just verbally ripping a new one or something.
Yeah, that's what I'm saying. Exactly. Verbal repartee. Just do some Oscar Wilde stuff on them. Just like, what was that? And then just break them down so they don't have no clue what the hell's going on. Sarcasm. And then say, what?
Well, I've done that.
So what did you make here? A guy comes in. Mage Knight's better. What'd you make here? Nothing. There you go. When you say you couldn't design a game like that, could you design it if you invested the same like 8 years or so that I've invested in learning design games? You probably could. If it's not, it's not curing cancer. Designing a board game. It mainly takes some working on it to get the knack. It is probably true that I don't know, maybe half of the gamers out there, if they really worked at it steadily for a period of time, could design a pretty good game. They probably could, and Kickstarter is suggesting that about a quarter of them do lately. God knows, there's enough Kickstarters out there. What was I going to tell you about that? But I suppose there have been times, not around my own designs
so much, but just at game night when there's somebody who I can't stand, where I have kind of just sort of verbally done the equivalent of throwing a punch across the counter at them. There's some gamers, I just can't stand you, and I just need you to like be afraid of me and not not try to compete with me anymore. In fact, there was an occasion, I won't say the guy's name, but this gamer who really just drove me absolutely crazy, and I finally just kind of had it out with him and just like, don't try to game with me, don't sit down at the table, don't hover over my game, nothing, just play with other people. And unfortunately, he and I both liked Martin Wallace games, so I was sitting there one time with a new Martin Wallace game, and I should mention this guy talks kind of like a stuttering Mr. Howell. This is the voice this guy does. And so, well, I'd really like to try this new game that Eric, but Eric hates me. He hates me. I would love to play this new game, but I know that Eric hates me. And I just said, well, that's true. Stop and left it at that.
And then just walk away. It's like a mic drop. Like,
oh, no, I just, yeah. Although really, walk away in that case was just continue to sit at my table looking up at him. Like, you're the one who's got to go away, buddy. Eventually,
like,
you an state.
You're standing. You're the one that's going to turn around and walk away, not me. We are coming up close to the time, and I wanted to ask a couple more questions. And that part of that is you're talking about you have a game night that you go to regularly. What were some of the games that you played in your formative years that kind of led you up into the games that you design now? Because the games that you design now are the game mechanics are just as interesting as the game's storyline itself.
Well, and in truth, I'm really all about the mechanic. You know, the game storyline, I won't say it's totally unimportant to me, and I want the theme and the mechanic to have a relationship. But games originate for me in a good idea for a mechanic, really, and theme to me is in some ways less important. There are a bunch of games I played as a kid, but there was a real discontinuity between my adult gaming life and my kid gaming life. Because my kid gaming life started, or I should say it stopped about my first year of college or so. Like, I kind of lost that group of gaming friends I had with you. I used to play things like Illuminati and Cosmic Encounter, and games that were big in the mid-1980s or so. As a kid, I used to see those little metagaming micro games, and I would try to play them, and they were much too hard for me as a kid because they were basically little hex encounter war games. You know, they weren't meant for, you know, a 9-year-old to play, really. But I would buy them because they were only $3 and I could afford them, and I'd sort of play with the counter. Oh, this game's hard. Like, I played them with my dad a couple of times. And I think my dad showed me some of those old games like Ironsides, things like that. But then really it was rediscovering games as an adult about 2002 when I finally finished grad school. I'd been doing some games with kids in therapy when I was doing play therapy and I had child clients. And I got invited to a couple of gaming parties, one of which somebody brought Cosmic Encounter, and it's like, oh yeah, I remember I used to really like, you know, playing these games, you know, and I just kind of had forgotten about that. And, you know, getting out of, in grad school, I had literally no, you know, fun life at all. You know, grad school, it's just nose to the grindstone all the time. So I was kind of trying to rediscover, well, what do people do for fun? As Rodney Dangerfield said, what do people do when they ain't getting loaded? I don't know. So I started going to a game night that I no longer go to, but that's still going in San Francisco, and that's where I got introduced to Euro games. And Euro games were really what caught my imagination, and started to have an influence on me. So Reiner Knizia games, even though those aren't really my favorite games, in some ways those were the game mechanics that made the most sense to me. And so my first couple of designs were kind of like more Germanish style Euro games. And Martin Wallace games certainly are ones I really liked that had a big influence on me. Although in some ways my imagination doesn't seem to go down the same paths as his. So none of my designs feel very much like Martin Wallace games to me, even though he's my favorite designer in a lot of ways. But it's really that whole school of games. And certainly Dominion deck building. A lot of my favorite games are deck building games. So Dominion had a big impact on me, and that was a big influence.
Dominion is actually one of the games that I see occasionally when I'm looking at when I go into a gaming store. I see it and I think about picking it up, and there's new expansion packs out now that are current. But like for me, what I play currently, or what I'm interested in playing currently, when me and the wife have time, is I'm still trying to convince Dennis to start a D&D group with me. And I know that's role-playing games, but I'm trying to get a D&D group online, if nothing else. I love the game Zombies. The mechanics of that game, you can't help but to have fun. I love all of the Munchkin games, and I'm looking up because I have a shelf of games.
Got them alphabetical?
No, they're by size because they're sitting on top of a bookshelf and they're very vicariously stacked,
Gotcha.
so all of them fit on one shelf. But I like games like the Munchkin games and the Flux games, and that's some of those mechanics translate into Don't Turn Your Back, and it's, I guess, to know that you grew up playing this type of game, it makes a lot more sense now, because I personally wouldn't have been able to design that game, because it's a couple of different types of games thrown together, and it melds very, very sweetly, very, very tightly into a game that, like, I personally feel like you should play it with 4 people. 4 people would make that game much more energetic.
I think the sweet spot is 3 to 4. It plays pretty well with 2, but 2 isn't the sweet spot for it, I would say. You kind of need, but I think it plays just as well with 3 or 4. You just kind of, a lot of games are like that. In a sense, the people above 2 are kind of the additional randomizer that the game needs, and with 2 people, most games, I think, with just 2 people are too deterministic for my taste. Like, it's too easy to suss out, well, I'm going to do this, now I'll expect you to do that, and da-da-da-da.
Yeah, that's kind of the gaming that I grew up with. I grew up with a more traditional board game. Like, right now, I have the Halo edition of Risk, which is completely different than the original. I have the Lord of the Rings Monopoly, but then I also have Stratego, which is one of my all-time favorite games, and that's more of like the one-on-one 2-player game. I do this. I expect you to do this. I expect your next move, like chess. You need to react this way so I can react next.
Yeah, for the most part, 2-player games really aren't my favorites. I have a couple of friends that I'll play 2-player games with once in a while, but I really enjoy the experience of multiplayer gaming much more, which is interesting because in conversational interactions, I'm just the opposite. I'd much rather sit and talk with one person than a group of people in terms of socializing. I think there's just something about that one-on-one fight to the death I don't really dig. It makes you feel worse about losses in a way. And in a sense, it makes you feel worse about wins because it's like, oh, it's audio, man. It's better luck, that kind of vibe with one person. Whereas with when you're playing a bunch of people, it's like, oh well, I don't expect to have better than a 1 in 25. Excuse me, 1 in 25. Excuse me. I don't expect to have better than a 25% chance of winning in a 4-player game. So, I lost. Oh well, big deal. I'll get upset if I lose the next 3 games too.
Dennis, I've been kind of dominating this conversation. Did you have anything you wanted to ask?
No, that's all right, man. You go right ahead. I'm still recovering from surgery. So, yeah.
Oh, that's right. You had teeth pulled.
Oh,
Yeah.
you just have your wisdom teeth out?
No, evidently I had an abscess for 6 months. 6 months in the molar. I didn't know. So it was a very painful procedure. We're coming up on a week now. It was quite horrible.
Oh, all right, man. I had my first root canal last year. That was a ghastly affair. The bill was ghastly.
I've done a lot of things in my life, and I can truly say this is probably one of the most painful things I've ever experienced, ever. And that's saying a lot coming from me. So
yeah.
Well, Eric, we are right up on our time. Before we go, because I am a horrible host and I forget every single time that I have somebody on, go ahead and plug website, social media, contacts, any place that somebody can find you. Plug away before we get to the end. That way, I can't go to sleep tonight saying I forgot to
Sure, no problem.
have you do it.
Somebody's trying to get in touch with me can go to my website, which is vaingloriousgames, all one word, .net. And you can reach me by email or get to my Facebook page for Vainglorious Games. You can find me easily enough there. If you're looking for my most recent games, then going to Evil Hat's website, which I think is just evilhat.com. You can come upon my games there. If you're interested in my game, Romans Go Home, that's distributed by Asmodee. If you just search Romans Go Home, it will come up all kinds of places. You can also play it over the internet on a website called boitejeu.net. I think that's .net. BOITEAJEUX. I'm pretty sure I spelled that right, or at least came close enough to spelling it right that somebody else should be able to find it if they Google it. Really kind of cool to see one of my games in an online implementation, and I log on all the time and play with Frenchmen.
Well, Eric, it has been an absolute blast to have you back. I learned quite a bit. If nothing else, I learned that I should not be at Master Control because I keep forgetting to change the camera. But
okay.
Thank you so very much. And anytime, the next time when your Kaiju Co. game is coming out, you want to plug away, just send me an email and let me know, and we'll have you back on. It's been a blast.
Sounds good. Maybe around September when Don't Turn Your Back hits the streets. We could think about it again. Sounds great. Thanks for having me. I've had a lot of fun. And catch you next time. And don't be so hard on yourself.
Oh, we love self-loathing in this group.
Yeah.
How I get shit done. I have to hate myself to get it done. Otherwise, I'm contented. It'll never work.
No, you don't. You don't tell yourself that. It's not actually true. In fact, you may actually find that eventually say, well, if I try to do this, I'll beat myself up to try to get myself to do it harder, and I don't want to beat myself up, so I guess I'll just have tacos. That will probably actually happen more often than you think.
I'm having tacos tonight for dinner, actually. I think they might be ready, actually. But thank you so very much again. Hank, we hope you're still listening.
Yeah.
We'll catch you all next week.
Later, Hank.
Take it easy. Thanks for having me, guys. Bye-bye.
They're laying inside, and I don't give a fuck.